My husband faked his death and stole his dead twin brother's identity so he could live with his pregnant sister-in-law. In my first life, I exposed him. Ryan denied everything, pushed me into an icy river, and watched from the bank while I fought to breathe. His family locked our 5-year-old daughter in a cow shed for asking why her father no longer recognized her. 3 days later, Lily was starving. I was still burning with fever. Ryan's mother threw us into a snowstorm without money, food, or even a coat. My daughter and I froze to death in the street, while my husband protected another woman. I still remembered Lily crying in the cow shed because she could not understand why her father no longer wanted her. By the time I recovered from the river, she had gone 3 days and nights without food. Later in the snow, her little body stopped trembling in my arms. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day Ryan planned to become his twin. This time I decided to help my husband die. Max, Ryan's identical twin, had been killed during a disaster relief mission. Ryan cut his hair, changed his clothes, and returned home pretending to be Max. And he told everyone the dead man was Ryan. The twins looked identical, but I knew my husband's habits. Every scar on his body and the long mark across the web of his hand. Ryan expected me to recognize him, beg him to come home, and keep a secret. Instead, I threw myself beside Max's and cried, "Ryan is dead. We should cremate him immediately." For 1 second, panic flashed across Ryan's face. In my previous life, I had pointed at that scar and screamed the truth. Ryan called me hysterical. His mother said grief had driven me insane. Serena clung to his arm and accused me of trying to steal her husband. No one believed me. This time, I lowered my eyes and played the obedient widow. The body should not be kept waiting. I said, "Let my husband rest with dignity." Ryan could not object without exposing himself. He carried the coffin away and hurried the cremation, eager to destroy the evidence of the switch. I watched the flames consume the corpse. Every photograph, fingerprint, and physical clue that could prove which brother had died vanished in the fire. Ryan had wanted to erase himself from my life. I simply made the eraser official. When he returned carrying the urn, he watched me carefully, waiting for recognition. I cried over the ashes. Instead, every tear told the neighbors I accepted that Ryan was dead, and every witness made it harder for him to reclaim his name. Later at the wake, neighbors filled the courtyard, looked pale enough to convince everyone I was a devastated widow. Ryan stood beside Serena, with one arm around her waist. "She just learned she is pregnant," he told me. "She should not remain near the deceased, so she will not stand vigil." The tenderness on his face was the same tenderness he had denied Lily and me. Serena stroked her stomach and smiled. "Your house has no man now. You'll need my Max to help you in the future. You cannot expect that help for free." Ryan immediately asked for the gold bracelets and earrings. My mother had spent her life saving for me. Then he demanded the money he claimed his dead brother had hidden in our house. Even after pretending to die, my husband still wanted my dowry. I covered my face and began to cry. "There is nothing left. Ryan spent it all. Even my dowry went to support him." "Impossible," he snapped. "My brother said there were more than $500. The villagers turned toward him. A supposedly grieving brother sounded remarkably eager to empty his dead brother's home. I dragged Ryan's clothes, letters, documents, and gifts into the courtyard and threw them into the brazier. "If these things are all I have left, I will burn them for him. Then no one can accuse me of hiding his fortune." Ryan stepped forward on instinct, then stopped. His face twisted as every trace of his old life turned to ash. But he could not save a single item without admitting it belonged to him. Inside, Lily looked at the living man everyone called Uncle Max. "Mommy," she whispered, "that is Daddy." "Why is everyone saying Daddy is dead?" My heart broke all over again. Even a 5-year-old knew him. He still refused to claim her. I held both her hands and forced myself to answer gently. "Daddy is gone. From now on, we only have each other." Ryan stood outside the door and heard every word. He flinched, but he did not step inside. The next morning, I carried the death certificate to Ryan's military commander. Ryan had served for years and was on his way to a powerful career. But a dead man could not keep his rank, salary, benefits, or future. "My husband is gone," I said. "I need work in the military district so I can support my daughter." The commander processed Ryan's discharge. His pension and funeral allowance became mine as his widow. The organization also arranged a job far from the Prescott family. With a few signatures, Ryan Prescott officially ceased to exist. Commander warned that work in the military district would be difficult and far from home. I told him I had thought it through. For the first time since waking in this life, escape became more than a wish. It became a real job and 2 seats on a train. When I returned, his mother was forcing Lily to peel corn in the courtyard. My daughter's little hands were blistered and bleeding. "She is 5 years old," I shouted, lifting her into my arms. Ryan's mother spat at our feet. "You gave the family no son. You and that useless girl cannot expect to eat without working. Then we will leave. My husband is dead, so there is no reason for us to remain here." She blocked the gate. "If you leave, who will cook and clean for Serena? She is carrying the Prescott family's only grandson." Serena stood by the window with one hand over her belly. I supported her with the other. "Do not be stubborn, Eleanor," he ordered. "Mother is old, and Serena needs care." When I gave birth to Lily, my water broke and I went to the hospital alone. Ryan had not asked whether I survived. His mother had despised my daughter from the moment she learned she was not a boy. Now, they wanted me to work like a servant for my husband's mistress. That night, I heard voices behind Serena's door. "What if Eleanor discovers the baby is Ryan's?" Serena whispered. Ryan answered tenderly, "For you and our child, I will protect you for life. Mother knows everything that is why she agreed to let me take Max's identity." I stood in the dark hallway until my nails cut into my palms. The pregnancy had begun before Max died. The entire family knew Ryan promised Serena that he would protect her and their child for life. His mother had agreed to the identity switch and expected me to remain in the house as Serena's servant. In their minds, allowing Lily and me to stay and work for them was generosity. They had not created the lie to protect a grieving widow. They had created it to give Ryan, Serena, and their son a family while stripping Lily and me of ours. 2 days later, the commander confirmed my position. I packed only what Lily and I could carry and bought 2 train tickets. We would leave before dawn, but Ryan was waiting at the gate. His eyes dropped to the tickets in my hand. He snatched them, read the destination, and tore them into pieces. "You're not leaving. Serena needs you. Here you are, Max now." I reminded him. "What right do you have to stop your dead brother's widow?" His face stiffened. "I can take care of both families," said. "Serena needs me, but that does not mean I have abandoned you. And Lily, her child, can be considered yours, too." I slapped him. The sound cracked through the courtyard. "You abandoned us the moment you decided your daughter was easier to bury than your lie." Ryan's expression hardened, seized my wrist, and dragged me toward the house, while Lily cried behind us. "You will stay here until you come to your senses." Then shouting erupted beyond the gate. The door was pushed open. Ryan looked up at the person standing there, and every trace of color vanished from his face. The man standing in the doorway was Major Vance, the commander of Max's garrison, flanked by 2 armed military policemen and the village chief. Behind them stood half the village, drawn by the sound of glass breaking and my mother-in-law's earlier screaming. Ryan froze. His hand, still wrapped painfully tight around my wrist, slacked. Just a fraction. Major Vance's eyes, hard, gray, and weathered by 20 years of service, swept over the courtyard. They lingered on the torn train tickets scattering across the mud, moved to my bruised wrist, and finally settled on Ryan's pale, sweat-slicked face. "Sergeant Max Prescott," Vance said, his voice dropping like an iron bar onto stone. "We were told you survived the landslide at the reservoir. We were also told you had returned home to comfort your late brother's family." Ryan swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the quiet courtyard. He forced his shoulders back, attempting to mimic his twin's rigid, posture-perfect stance. "Major Vance, sir." "Yes, I just arrived yesterday. I was trying to settle my brother's affairs." "Settle his affairs?" Vance took a step forward. The heavy leather of his service boots crunched on the gravel. "By tearing up official military transit documents issued to a fallen soldier's widow." "She isn't in her right mind, Major." Ryan's mother rushed out from the kitchen, her apron smeared with grease, her face twisted in desperate eagerness. "She's hysterical. Ryan's death drove her mad. She's trying to kidnap our little Lily and run away to the north. Max was only trying to keep the family together." I didn't scream. I didn't cry out or point at his hand. I had made that mistake in my first life, and it had bought me 3 days in a freezing cow shed and an icy river. Instead, I dropped to my knees right there in the dirt. I pulled Lily close, wrapping my arms around her trembling body, burying her face into my shoulder so she wouldn't have to look at them. I kept my head bowed, my voice trembling with just the right cadence of broken, exhausted grief. Major Vance, I whispered, loud enough for the villagers at the gate to hear. Every word. My husband, Ryan, is dead. I cremated his remains with my own hands. Yesterday. His ash urn sits in the main room. I have signed his discharge papers. I have surrendered his rank. I asked for nothing from this family except permission to take my daughter and work for my own bread. I raised my eyes, letting Vance see the raw, red ring on my wrist where Ryan's fingers had dug in moments before. If my brother-in-law, Max, wishes to stay and care for Serena and her unborn child, that is his duty, I continued, tears overflowing precisely on cue.
But
Ryan left us nothing. We have no food here. We have no place in this house.
why?
Must Max force my husband's widow to stay and serve another woman? A murmur ran through the crowd at the gate. Look at her wrist, a neighbor whispered behind her hand. Max just got back, and he's already laying hands on his brother's widow. And forcing her to cook for Serena? Serena isn't even his wife yet. Ryan's body isn't even cold in the urn, and they're treating his daughter like a stray dog. Ryan's face turned from pale to ash gray. He could feel the eyes of the village cutting into his back. More importantly, he could feel Major Vance's gaze, heavy and suspicious. Is this true, Sergeant? Vance asked, his voice deathly quiet. You are detaining a deceased soldier's dependents against their will.
No.
Major, you don't understand. Ryan took a half step toward Vance, raising his hands in explanation. He forgot. In his panic, he forgot. He raised his right hand, palm open. The bright sunlight hit the web of his hand, illuminating the dark, jagged scars stretching between his thumb and forefinger, a scar Ryan had gotten 5 years ago when a rusty scythe slipped while he was trying to dodge farm work. Max had never had that scar. Max's hands were calloused from rifle stocks and iron tools, smooth of any such disfigurement. Major Vance's eyes flicked down to that hand. A tiny, almost imperceptible crease appeared between the commander's brows. He didn't say anything about the scar, not yet. Vance was an old soldier. He knew when a thread was loose, and he knew better than to yank it in the middle of a crowded yard. Sergeant Prescott, Vance said coldly, you will report to the district headquarters tomorrow morning at 0800 hours.
There are inconsistencies in the
casualty report from the reservoir disaster. Your squad leader reported you missing in action under 3 feet of mud, yet you walked back into your village without reporting to the field hospital first. You will undergo a full physical examination and a formal debriefing. Ryan's breath hitched. A physical examination. A military medical exam would check blood types, old combat scars, dental records, and physical markers. Max had a shrapnel scar on his left shoulder from a border skirmish 2 years ago. Ryan's left shoulder was completely smooth. Major, I am grieving my brother, Ryan stammered, his voice losing its firm, commanding edge. My health is fine. It was not a request, Sergeant, Vance interrupted. He turned his eyes to me. Sister-in-law Eleanor. The military district honors its dead. Your travel
passes are valid.
If someone tore them, I will issue new ones at the garrison office today.
Pack your things.
An army transport truck is waiting at the edge of the village to take you to the station. Ryan stepped forward, pure desperation flushing his throat red. Eleanor, you
can't.
Who is going to? He stopped himself just in time before saying who is going to take care of. Serena? I didn't give him the chance to fix his mistake. I bowed deeply to Major Vance. My hand pressed against Lily's back. Thank you, Major. My husband can rest in peace, knowing the military has not forgotten his widow and child. 10 minutes later, I had packed our entire lives into 2 canvas bags. We had no gold. We had no fine clothes. The Prescott family had stripped Ryan's wages bare over the years, spending them on Serena's silk scarves and Ryan's gambling debts in the nearby town. I took only 3 changes of clothes for Lily, her small wooden sparrow toy, my mother's old sewing needles, and the official death certificate stamped with the red wax seal of the military precinct. As I walked out of the bedroom, Serena was standing in the dark, narrow hallway. Her pregnancy was barely showing, but she held her belly with both hands as if she were carrying a glass vase. Her eyes were swollen red, not with grief, but with rage. You think you're smart, don't you? Serena spat, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the soldiers outside wouldn't hear. You took his pension. You took his death allowance. How are Max and I supposed to live? How is his child? Supposed to eat. I stopped in front of her. For 5 years, I had shrunk back whenever Serena raised her voice, terrified of making a scene, terrified of losing Ryan's bitter, conditional affection. Now, I looked down at her face, seeing only the pathetic, parasitic creature she truly was. You have your Max, don't you? I said, my voice smooth and ice-cold.
He is
An officer. He has a salary. Why do you need a dead man's pension? You know Ryan is. Serena caught herself, clapping a hand over her own mouth, her eyes wide with terror. Ryan is dead, Serena, I whispered, leaning in closer until my breath touched her ear. I saw him burn. I smelled the smoke.
If you say he's alive, then
You're calling your Max a deserter and an impostor.
and you know what the
Military does to men who steal dead soldiers' names to run from their duties.
don't you?
Serena's skin drained of color. She stepped back, her heel catching on the doorframe, stumbling until she backed into the dark bedroom. I didn't look back at her again. In the courtyard, Ryan's mother was screaming at the village chief, claiming I was stealing family property. But the chief, seeing Major Vance standing stiffly by the gate with 2 armed men, merely waved his hand dismissively. She's taking her own clothes and her daughter, old lady Prescott, the chief grunted. Your son Ryan is dead. You want to keep his widow as a servant?
The
Entire village sees what you're doing. Have some shame. Ryan stood near the well, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. His eyes burned into me as I walked past him. He wanted me to stop.
he wanted me.
To give him that familiar, desperate look of an obedient wife waiting for her husband's approval. He was waiting for me to break, to beg him for help, to give him an excuse to step in and play the savior. I walked right past him without a single glance. To me, he was already a ghost. As Major Vance helped Lily into the high cabin of the green military truck, I turned back one last time. Ryan was watching me from the shadows of the eaves. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting long, bloody red shadows across the courtyard. In his eyes, I saw the first genuine sliver of terror. He had thought he was erasing himself to start a new, easy life with his mistress. He didn't realize that by letting me declare him dead, he had built his own prison and I had just turned the key. The military transport brought us to the garrison town 15 miles away. Major Vance gave us a small, clean room in the military dependence hostel near the station. The room had 2 iron cots, a wooden desk, and a stove that actually burned bright, warm coal. For 3 days, Lily and I stayed in that room. For the first time in her 5 years of life, my daughter ate until her stomach was full. I bought white flour mantou, soft eggs, and hot soybean milk from the street vendors below. On the second night, as I brushed Lily's thin, tangled hair by the lamplight, she looked up at me with her round, dark eyes. Mommy, she whispered, her voice tiny. Is Daddy really in that jar? My hand paused with the comb. I looked at her reflection in the small wall mirror. The daddy who loved us is gone, Lily, I told her gently, wrapping my hand over hers. The man you saw in the yard, he is just a stranger named Max who belongs to someone else. Lily didn't ask again. She nestled her head into my lap, her breath evening out into sleep. A child's instinct is sharp. She knew where she was safe, and she knew that the house in the village had been full of wolves. On the 3rd morning, a knock came at the door. It wasn't Major Vance. It was a young lieutenant with a crisp uniform and a dark leather folder under his arm. Mrs. Eleanor Prescott, he asked respectfully, taking off his cap. Major Vance requests your presence at the district command office. It concerns the formal audit of Sergeant Max Prescott's service records. My heart gave a quiet, measured thud. It was happening faster than I thought. Of course, I said softly. I put on my plain blue cotton coat, wrapped Lily in her small wool scarf, and followed the lieutenant down the stairs. The district command building was a cold, stone structure built during the war.
Years.
The hallways smelled of floor wax, tobacco, and old paper. When the lieutenant opened the door to the inner office, I saw Major Vance sitting behind a heavy mahogany desk. Standing in the middle of the room, looking pale, disheveled, and exhausted, was Ryan. He was wearing Max's military uniform, but it looked loose on him. Max had worked heavy logistics and field engineering. His shoulders were broad. Ryan was a clerk who spent his evenings in tea houses. His posture was slouched, his chin
Weak.
Sitting on a chair beside the window was Serena, her eyes red and sunken, clutching a hand towel. Ryan's mother was sitting on the wooden bench against the wall, rocking back and forth, muttering complaints under her breath. When I entered, Ryan turned his head instantly. A flash of relief washed over his face, the arrogant belief that I had been brought here to fix his mistake. Eleanor. Ryan stepped toward me, his voice sharp with authority.
Tell the
Major. Tell him about Max's old injuries. Tell him I am Max. Silence. Major Vance slammed a heavy palm on the desk. The room fell deathly quiet. Vance picked up a sheet of paper from the desk, his eyes cold as flint. Mrs. Prescott, Vance said, turning to me, we conducted the mandatory physical verification for Sergeant Max Prescott this morning, as required for all soldiers returning from disaster zones. Vance paused, looking over the top of his papers directly into Ryan's eyes. The physical records for Sergeant Max Prescott, filed 3 years ago during his enlistment medical, note 3 permanent physical identifiers, Vance read.
slowly.
First, a 3-inch surgical scar on his left shoulder from a shrapnel wound sustained during the 1974 border defense. Second, a missing fingernail on his left ring finger from a crushed injury in basic training. Third, blood type O positive. Vance placed the paper back on the desk. The man standing before us today, Vance continued, his voice dropping an octave into pure, lethal gravity, has no scar on his left shoulder. All 10 fingernails are perfectly intact. And his blood type, drawn 2 hours ago by our medical officer, is type A.
Boom.
The words dropped like an artillery shell into the small room. Ryan's mother stopped her rocking. Her jaw dropped open. Serena gasped, her hand clutching her stomach as if she had been punched. Ryan's knees buckled. He took a wild step backward until his back hit the cold, plastered wall. No, there was a mistake at the field hospital.
The blood
Test. The military medical corps does not make mistakes with blood typing, sir. Vance barked, standing up from his desk. His massive frame loomed over the room. Furthermore, we cross-reference fingerprints. Sergeant Max Prescott, S. prints, are on file in the provincial archive. Yours do not match. Vance walked out from behind his desk, stopping 2 feet from Ryan. You are not Sergeant Max Prescott, Vance said, each word dripping with
disgust.
which leaves us with 2 questions.
Who are you?
And where's the real
Sergeant Max Prescott.
Ryan's mouth worked uselessly, sound escaping in tiny, pathetically squeaking
Gasps.
He couldn't say he was Max. The physical proof was undeniable. If he admitted he was Ryan, he was admitting to desertion, falsifying military documents, stealing a dead soldier's identity, and claiming government death benefits under false pretenses. In the 1970s military system, desertion and fraud during a state disaster rescue operation carried a single sentence: execution by firing squad. Eleanor. Ryan turned his desperate, terrified gaze to me, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold them up. Eleanor, tell him.
Tell him who I am.
Save me. Eleanor, I'm your husband. The room went dead silent. Major Vance turned his heavy gaze to me. Mrs. Prescott? What is he talking
About.
I looked at Ryan. I looked at the man who, in my past life, had stood on the frozen bank of the river and watched me drown. The man who had let his mother lock our 5-year-old daughter in a manure-covered shed for 3 days without water. The man who had watched my daughter freeze to death in my arms on a dirt road, while he bought silk scarves for Serena. My heart didn't beat faster. My blood didn't run hot. I looked at him with the cold, absolute emptiness of a stone wall. I do not know what this man is talking about, Major, I said, my voice steady, clear, and ringing with sad dignity. My husband, Ryan Prescott, died 3 days ago. I burned his body myself. His death certificate is in your hands. I took a step forward, looking directly into Ryan's terrified eyes. This man claims to be my husband, I continued softly, tears pooling in my eyes. Right on command, but my husband loved his daughter. My husband would never let his mother lock our child in a shed. My husband was a civilian clerk, not a brave soldier. If this man is not Max Prescott, then he is an impostor who stole my late husband's name and my brother-in-law's uniform to escape his debts. You bitch. Ryan roared, losing his mind entirely. He lunged forward, his hands clawed toward my throat. You did this. You burned my papers. You burned my clothes. You knew all along.
Clang.
Before Ryan's fingers could even come within a foot of my neck, the 2 military policemen stepped in. One grabbed Ryan's arm, twisting it sharply behind his back, while the other drove a heavy knee into his stomach. Ryan collapsed to his knees with a choked groan, spewing bile onto the shiny
Floorboards.
Eleanor. Ryan screamed from the floor, tears and sweat pouring down his face, mixing with the filth. Tell them I'm Ryan. I don't want to die.
Tell
them I'm Ryan. If you are Ryan Prescott, Major Vance snapped, looking down at the squirming man on the floor with dark hatred, then you deserting your military post, forging official military casualty lists, stealing military property, and staging a fraudulent death to commit bigamy and treason against the state. Vance turned to the guards. Lock him in the garrison holding cell. Issue an immediate order to the Provincial Investigative Bureau. Search the disaster site at the reservoir.
Find
out what happened to the real Sergeant Max Prescott.
No.
Mother. Serena. Save me. Ryan shrieked as the two towering guards dragged him backward across the floor, his heels kicking uselessly against the
stone.
Serena didn't move. She shrank back into the corner, pressing herself against the wall, her face as white as paper, terrified that if she spoke, the guards would grab her too. Ryan's mother screamed, throwing herself toward the door, but the guard shoved her back into the room and slammed the thick oak door shut. The heavy thud of the lock sliding into place echoed through the room like the closing of a coffin lid. For the next 2 weeks, the garrison town was rocked by the scandal. The investigation moved with terrifying military efficiency. When the military investigators went back to the reservoir disaster site, they didn't just look for mud. They dug up the field camp logs. They found the truth, a truth even worse than what I had known in my past life. Max Prescott hadn't died in a natural landslide. Max had been leading a rescue team clearing timber from the damaged dam. Ryan, who had run away from the village 3 weeks earlier to avoid a gambling debt collector, had tracked Max down at the relief camp to beg for money. When the heavy rains broke the upper retainer wall, a torrent of mud and timber had trapped Max under a fallen support beam. Ryan had been standing on the high embankment. He had seen his twin pinned in the rising mud. Instead of throwing his brother the emergency rope, Ryan had watched Max drown. Then, while the camp was in utter chaos, Ryan had slid down into the mud, stripped the dog tags, watch, and papers from his twin's warm corpse and left Max's body buried deep beneath 6 feet of silt. He had returned to the village 3 days later wearing Max's uniform, pretending that Ryan was dead and that Max had returned to care for the
family.
When the military divers finally recovered Max's body from the bottom of the reservoir basin, they found the truth etched into the wood of the support beam. Max had used his pocket knife to carve the letters RYN into the timber. Before he suffocated, he knew who had left him to die. When the investigative report was read aloud at the public military tribunal, the entire courtroom erupted. I sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing a simple black arm ribbon for Max, holding Lily on my lap. Across the courtroom, in the iron prisoner's cage, sat Ryan. In 2 short weeks, he had aged 20 years. His hair was patchy, his cheeks hollow, his eyes wild and bloodshot. Beside him in the dock was his mother. She had been charged as an accessory to treason and fraud for knowingly helping her son steal a dead soldier's identity and attempting to appropriate state military funds. Serena was sitting in the witness bench, guarded by 2 civil policemen. The moment she realized Ryan was facing the death penalty, she had turned on him completely, handing over every letter, every scrap of paper Ryan had ever written her, swearing under oath that Ryan had forced her to go along with the lie under threat of violence. She thought she could save herself. She was wrong. The court found her guilty of harboring a military deserter and conspiring to defraud the state pension system. She was sentenced to 8 years of hard labor in the northern state reform farms, to be served immediately after she gave birth. When the head magistrate slammed his gavel down and read the final verdict for Ryan Prescott, death by firing squad for treason, military fraud, and second-degree murder, Ryan's mother let out a high-pitched, curdling shriek and collapsed onto the stone floor, dark blood pooling from her mouth as she suffered a massive, debilitating stroke right there in the courtroom. Ryan didn't even look at his mother. He stared at the magistrate, his knees shaking so violently that the iron bars of his cage rattled with a hollow, rhythmic sound. Then slowly his neck creaked around. He looked at me. He looked at his wife, the woman he had considered a timid, obedient servant. The woman he had pushed into an icy river in another life. The woman he had left to freeze in the snow with his child. He saw no anger in my eyes. No grief. No hatred. Only the quiet, cold satisfaction of an accountant closing an old ledger. Eleanor. Ryan mouthed through the iron bars, his lips dry and cracking, tears cutting pale trails through the dirt on his cheeks. Eleanor, please. I didn't answer. I reached down, took Lily's small, warm hand in mine, stood up, and turned my
Back on him for the last time.
The execution took place 3 days later, at dawn, behind the garrison rifle.
Range.
I didn't go to watch. I had no need to see the lead tear through his chest.
The
sound of the morning artillery practice 6 miles away was notice enough. That afternoon, Major Vance personally delivered the final military documents to my hostel room, because Max had died a hero in the line of duty, and because Ryan's crimes had been fully exposed. The military granted Max the highest posthumous honor.
as.
Max had no legal wife or surviving competent direct blood relatives, his mother remaining paralyzed and mute in the prison hospital. The full state heroes, pension and death compensation were awarded to the sole remaining legitimate heir of the Prescott family branch, Lily Prescott. The total payout was over $3,000, a fortune in the late 1970s, along with a permanent housing allocation in the capital city of the Northern Military District and a guaranteed spot for Lily in the prestigious Provincial Military Academy when she came of age. You fought hard for your daughter, Mrs. Prescott, Major Vance said, bowing his head slightly as he handed me the red leather passbook and the train tickets. Your husband, Ryan, was a disgrace to his blood, but Sergeant Max was a
Good man.
He would be glad to know his sacrifice bought a future for his niece. Thank you, Major, I said softly, holding the documents to my chest. Max can rest now. The next morning at 0500, the steam whistle of the Northern Express echoed across the train platform. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the cold scent of early winter pine from the northern mountains. Snowflakes were beginning to drift down from the pale gray sky, soft, white, and gentle. In my first life, snow had meant death. It had meant the feeling of my fingers going numb as I hugged Lily's small, lifeless body to my chest in a dark alleyway, listening to her heart stop beating while the wind howled around us. In this life, the snow fell on the thick, plush wool coat I had bought for Lily. Yesterday, a bright crimson coat with silver brass buttons that kept her snug and warm from chin to boots. Mommy, look. Lily pointed her small, gloved hand toward the window of the warm, heated train car. It's snowing. It looks like sugar. I smiled, sitting down on the soft green velvet seat beside her, pulling a warm velvet blanket over our lap. On the small wooden table in front of us sat 2 silver cups of hot, sweet tea and a box of fresh pastries. The train shuddered, the heavy iron wheels grinding against the steel rails as the locomotive began to roll forward. I looked out the window. The platform slid away. The gray stone buildings of the garrison town shrank into the distance. Beyond them, far across the white fields, lay the tiny, miserable village of the Prescott family, a place of cold concrete, cruel hearts, and dark cowsheds that would soon be buried beneath the deep, quiet winter. The house was empty now. The mother was paralyzed in a prison ward. Serena was waiting in a cold cell for her child to be born before being sent to the northern labor camps. Ryan was 6 feet beneath the cold earth behind the rifle range, his name erased from every record except the list of executed traitors. I reached out and brushed a stray lock of dark hair from my daughter's forehead. Her cheeks were pink, her breath warm, her small hand firmly wrapped around
Mine.
The train accelerated, breaking through the white mist, carrying us far away from the past, heading straight toward the bright, rising sun of the north. I leaned my head against the glass, took a deep, clear breath of the warm air inside the cabin and finally closed my eyes. The winter was cold, but for the first time in 2 lives, we were warm.